Guard's response on claims has not been as prompt as we would like it to be. Excuse me. One issue with Travelers compared to Guard is that Guard has kind of agreed to use Charlie Dormany as defense attorney, at least for the moderate cases, whereas Travelers has their own in-house defense counsel, and that's probably not an option for us. They'll certainly cooperate with Charlie and keep him apprised of their actions on defending any claims, but it's probably not going to be practical to get him assigned as defense counsel. On the property, we went to a number of other markets, and the best numbers we had were comparable to what ACE was in terms of price, but it only had $1 million in flood coverage, where we have $5 million of flood for property in zones A and V, and $10 million for properties in zones X. So we didn't feel like that was a viable proposal. The ACE premium, we were able to get them down $6,500. I sent that revised spreadsheet to Pam and Janice shortly before lunch. Okay, so the premium came down $6,500 or $6,600 from where it was originally, and that's the best we could get them to do. So it's about a 7%, excuse me, about an 8% increase in premium on the property. The premium that we were paying before we moved to ACE 3 years ago was $248,000 and some change. So we're still well below the premium we were at 3 years ago. I'm confident that they're the most competitive option we have at this point.
Okay, thank you. Just a few comments or question. Essentially, our premium is going up. I see the number here is like 7%, some $29,000 roughly.
Yes, sir.
Over the last years, and it's with a well-known company. And the major drivers, in your view, is just an overall industry cost increase, perhaps, or a premium increase for all the clients, and not specifically our industry or us as an experience-rated premium, or is it specifically us?
It's a combination of two things. I think the primary thing is the general industry trend right now is on increases. Insurers across the state of Georgia have been struggling to maintain profitability, particularly on the auto line of business, probably due in part to distracted driving. I was at a meeting a year or so ago with the Assistant Commissioner of Insurance, and he made the comment that auto insurers in Georgia had not made a profit in 10 years for the state as a whole and the industry as a whole. In addition, our experience has not been bad, but it hadn't been spectacular either, so loss experience has a little bit of impact on that pricing.
Okay. And Andrew, just in general, what's our trend compared to the last 3 years, for example, in auto incidents?
Last year we had a pretty bad year from a auto incident standpoint. We had several, I think we had 12 or 14 accidents that, now some of them didn't necessarily get filed on insurance because they didn't meet the damage limits, but we're working through some of that now. Yesterday and today, staff went through defensive driver training that gives us some reduction in our premium. So we're working through some of that, but we did have a pretty bad year last year, so hopefully we'll see those reduced this year.
Okay. So we're doing the things we need to do to position us better for a better experience-rated premium next year. Industry drivers are what's moving our premium up. So with that, Commissioner Elliott, do you have thoughts, comments?
Well, I don't like to change coverages, but I think that trying to so if we go to travelers, they're lower on general liability, right?
Yes, sir.
And they're lower on, no, they're not lower on automobile. Is that correct? Am I reading it correct?
They are not lower on automobile. They are lower, where the big difference in premium between Travelers and Guard is the $1 million umbrella. Travelers is $5,600 and Guard is $12,000.
Why,
And the Travelers also is about half the general liability. They're about $20,000 less on general liability compared to Guard, but they're about $15,000 higher on
Well,
auto.
we had Guard last year and they raised it $5,000. Where did you say they were gonna give us a break?
Well, where Travelers is more competitive on the line premiums is on general liability. It's about $20,000 less than Guard. Their automobile's about $15,000 more than Guard. And then the umbrella, $1 million umbrella is $5,600 for Travelers versus $12,000 for Guard.
Well, the one that's not different, if I'm reading the numbers right, is the property because we're staying with ACE.
That's correct.
American
Property
Insurance.
is with ACE on both options.
So, I mean, there's a big number there, but, I'd say we, suppose it's 91, 100, so it's a $9,000 difference.
Basically, $8,600 roughly.
And everything else is pretty much the same.
Everything else is the same.
Well, I would jump, but I'd like to listen to the staff. What is the staff position on this?
And Ms. Meredith can speak to this as our claims administrator here. Guard has been somewhat difficult to deal with at times, and certainly $8,500 is not a tremendous amount of money to make a change, but given the problems we've been having with their claims issue and the increase in price, I think moving to Travelers makes a lot of sense.
Okay, well, I concur with that in that respect.
For example, on the couple of the automobile issues, I've been waiting for responses from Guard, trying to get things wrapped up.
Okay. Well, I recommend, Mr. Chairman, that we go with Travelers
And
on the portion that's called limited package total premium. That'd be Travelers, and then crime and everything else after that's the same.
okay, so if I understand this, Commissioner, you're recommending that we use the proposal offered with Travelers, and that premium is $427,906 as compared if we stay with the same carrier, it's round numbers, $445,000.
That's
Yes,
correct.
sir.
Okay, and you offer that as a motion?
I so move.
Okay, I'll second that, and then all in favor? Okay, passes.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Mr. McGinney.
If I may, and I hope I'm not out of order here, we had a claim Janice reported today that was like $2,000 where someone backed into something with one of your vehicles, a one-vehicle accident. Your deductible's $1,000. That may be one you want to think about not turning into insurance since, I mean, if it was my personal auto policy, I probably wouldn't turn that claim in. But obviously, you got the coverage, and we're happy to submit it and get it paid. But it keeps it off your loss experience.
Absolutely.
And, that may be something you want to think about.
Yeah, we
Thank
do
you.
often, if it's on us, we'll get a quote for, this time we got 3 quotes, but we'll get, 2 to 3 quotes, and then we look at it. If it's just a few $100, again, it's not worth adding it to the list.
What's our deductible?
$1,000 on
$1,000.
collision and comprehensive.
Can you have a higher deductible than that?
Yes, sir. you can.
What's the next higher level?
2,500. And I can ask travelers to give us a 20, since their auto premium is so high with Guard, their premium was so low, it wasn't much advantage to raise the deductible. With travelers having a higher premium on auto, it should be some significant savings, and I can get those numbers for you.
I would suggest we look at 2,500 and 5,000.
Okay?
Just makes us self-insured
Yes, sir.
for that low amount.
I would say 2,500 or 5,000 on collision, but leave comprehensive at either 1,000 or 2,500, since with comprehensive, if we had a hurricane and you had a bunch of vehicles, it applies separately.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to your recommendation on the change in the deductible.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
y'all.
Is this gonna be on tomorrow's agenda?
Yes, sir. Mr. McGinty, is there any way you could have that conversation with them so we could have that information for tomorrow?
We'll make every opportunity to do that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, item 3 on the approval list is for the capital projects plan for 2020.
Yes, sir. This was discussed at the Facilities Committee meeting earlier. The hope here is to get project approval for a year's worth of projects. What we currently do is come in project by project requesting approval. We did go through the scope of these projects in the facilities meeting. From a finance perspective, the total funding amount for the year would be $7.44 million, with $6.89 coming from R&R and $550,000 coming from capital improvement fees. That amount is in the uncommitted fund balance right now in both of those accounts. So as we continue to accrue funds from the payment of capital fees as well as our monthly transfers into R&R, that will replenish those accounts as we move forward. So we've got a wide variety of projects. In the memo, as you'll see, we're spending money in both water and sewer on the mainland and on the island. So we're hitting a lot of needed areas here. And also, as discussed at the facilities meeting, we have the existing SPLOST projects and large construction projects going on now. These projects will be scheduled in correlation to those to make sure we're not overworking staff, but we'll move forward. And most of these projects should be able to be completed prior to the end of the calendar year.
Okay.
And if this is approved, when we come back for the actual contracts, every contract will come back before the commission for review prior to moving forward.
Well, it's fresh on my mind as we saw it last meeting. Commissioner Elliott, any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I'd move that we move it forward to the full commission.
Second. All those in favor? Okay, approved. Under discussion item, we have the fiscal year 2020 audit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioners. As some brief background on this agenda item, each year the Commission engages the services of a certified public accounting firm to conduct an audit of our financial statements. In 2018, we employed the services of Malden & Jenkins through an RFP process. When Malden & Jenkins was chosen in 2018, we also had 2 option years, those being fiscal year 2019 and 2020. We did exercise that additional option year for 2019, and it's staff's intention to come back later to you with a recommendation to also exercise that option for the 2020 year. But when we brought the recommendation to the Commission last year, there was a request for some additional time this year for the Commission and the Finance Committee in particular to have the opportunity to ask any questions, to have any concerns addressed that you might have as a result of what had happened in the previous audit year. Again, it's staff's recommendation that we go ahead and exercise that, but if you have any questions or concerns, we certainly want to address those between now and the time that we bring that recommendation officially to the Finance Committee first and then eventually to the Commission for your approval. So the packet that you have in front of you in your read ahead is, first of all, a copy of the engagement letter from last year with Malden & Jenkins. This details the scope of work that Malden & Jenkins performed and also the responsibilities of staff and of management. And also in that packet are some pages that were excerpted from the request for proposal response that Malden & Jenkins originally submitted back in 2018 when we went through the procurement process.
Okay. I have a question.
Yes, sir.
This is a question that's not with this.
All right.
Exactly, but the last audit resulted in them telling us we needed to put our regulations together, our financial policies together, correct?
Yes, sir.
Have we got that done?
Yes, sir. And those have been approved by this committee and by the full commission.
Okay. I just want them to review that
Certainly.
as part of it, if they have any recommendations on our policies.
All right.
That's
Certainly.
everything.
All right.
Is that, without, since this is the first time I've seen it, without me reading this thing, is that in these instructions to Malden and Jenkins?
They will also review our internal controls, and that's part of the internal controls review process that they will do. So yes, sir, we will specifically make note of that since that was one of the items in their report to us.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And that's all I would change, not having read it. But
Certainly. Understood.
We just wanted to make sure before we come back with a recommendation that we had this audit scoped properly for what the commission wished to see after last year's discussion.
Thank you. And also, the commission does hire the firm, so if there are concerns that you have, you can certainly sit down with them and their audit committee at any time that you wish to have that conversation with them. And I believe we offered that opportunity, and it was accepted last year. So once again, that invitation still stands.
now our inventory is still being looked at, so that we're getting rid of stuff we don't need, basically. And so we understand what it is that we have. They generally sample the inventory, make our counts correct.
That's correct, yes, sir. That is part of the audit process.
Now, 2 years ago, that was mentioned as part of the audit, that the inventory controls and the counts were not accurate. At the one we had last year, those had been corrected, and it was not noted as a finding on our.
That's correct, but
It continues to be
have
part of the
everything under
scope.
control yet there,
Sorry.
but I don't think we really need to address that again, other than the normal sampling that they do.
Yes, sir.
Do you have anything? Okay, we're good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
And then let's go to item 2. The financial statement, end of the month, January.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. You have in your packages the financial statements for as of January 31st, 2020, and for the 7 months then ended in this fiscal year. Starting with the balance sheet, you'll see that our cash and cash equivalents at January 31st are approximately $3.2 million. There are a few reasons for that. One is one of the primary reasons is a couple lines down from that, the accounts receivable from customers has decreased substantially over the last 7 months to about $1.7 million. A good portion of that was from one particular customer, but that has resulted in a large increase in our actual cash being held. Again, down at the accounts receivable, you'll note that net of reserve for bad debts, we were at $2.4 million at the end of the 2019 year, and we're now down to under $700,000 or under $800,000 net of reserves for accounts receivable, which is roughly a week or 10 days of billings. So made great progress in that. Further down under the restricted cash accounts, you'll see the JWSC reserves have continued to increase, and some of that you'll see on the project report later on. There hasn't, to date, there hasn't been a lot expended on projects. That's going to change very quickly and in very large amounts. So we expect when we actually updated a 5-year projection as part of our budget, and there's going to be significant cash outflows over the next several months. So those reserves will come down. Those dealing with construction, anyway. The same is true for the capital capital reserves, which are the capital improvement funds. And with SPLOST, you'll see that we're up approximately $1.5 million on that as well.
On the SPLOST, since we brought that up, based off the returns we're getting on the receipts there, it appears we're going to collect the full amount of SPLOST prior to the original deadline. So the SPLOST receipts are coming in nicely at this point.
Other than that, my only other comment on the balance sheet itself is the accounts payable. And you'll see it January 31st, it was $420,000. That varies each month sometimes depending on what day the month ends on. January ended on a Friday, so we actually cut checks Thursday and Friday, so there was a large amount of payments for that week. So but again, that will go up and down from time to time.
Can we go back up to capital assets?
Sure.
How do we capitalize our capital equipment? It's that when we rebuild the system and capitalize all that, like the whole thing with North Mainland, anything that we're going to do, is that going to be considered O&M? Or when we do this stuff that we're going to do with Academy Creek, is that going to be capitalized? And how are you going to do that?
That would be capitalized, yes. When all of the items that are listed as projects on the project report
Yeah.
are named capital improvements. During the year, we accumulate all of the costs of those, and any that are completed at fiscal year end are then capitalized, and they go from a capital or construction in progress account to the permanent fixed asset account and become depreciable assets and start depreciating on the
Right.
date they're placed in service.
Okay, can you do a pro forma, what we'll look like with all the projects we've got going on for the next month? Of what we'll look like on 31 December 2020?
Actually, we've kind of done that on the project report. We've separated out the projects that are complete to date that we've been carrying forward. So those, which amounts to, well, I don't have a subtotal on this, but.
Well, I just mean, just
but
put
to answer your question,
put
yes,
another
I
little
can.
column on the balance sheet that shows what we're looking at. Because, I don't know who reads our stuff, but it looks like we're sitting very wealthy. And I just would like to have something that shows, yeah, we look wealthy, but it's all getting ready to get spent, and this is what we're going to look like at the end of the year.
Actually, we've been talking about some changes to the accounting, to the recording of the counting, because the method that we've been using, we charge any capital purchases to either the projects or to a capital purchases account during the year to track it for budget purposes. And then at the end of the year, all of that move all of that to the permanent depreciation schedules and start depreciating it. So when we do like a 5-year comparison across the board, all of those fixed assets drop off from the budget numbers. So we can't capture them to keep a rolling total on that. And to do that, it requires setting up a series of offset accounts where we record it as an expenditure against budget, but in the accounting records, it actually zeroes out and the assets go to the permanent fixed assets immediately, rather than waiting until year end.
Oh, okay. That'd be a good idea.
Yes, we did that with the reserves, and now we're looking at doing it with the fixed assets as well.
Okay.
John, is there anything significant here you want to highlight? Basically, our focus that I'm offering here is where we're going to land year end versus where we are to date.
Yes,
compared to our
That's a couple of
plan.
pages in, Commissioner, as on my way there. I wanted to go over the cash report first, the schedule of cash balances right after the balance sheet. And January, of course, we were in a transition period from BB&T to Synovus for our investments. So some monies haven't been moved. We didn't move a lot of money over to investments. So during January, just to facilitate that transfer. But on that schedule of supplementary schedule of cash balances, you'll see at the bottom of the page we have all of our cash with the exception of SPLOST and bond funds. About 15% is being held in overnight cash funds in BB&T checking accounts that do earn interest. About 85% of our money is in investment accounts, which are largely in federal treasury bills and government agencies. And then we've got $3,000 that's change funds and petty cash and so on. Now, the next page is the prediction or estimation of year-end revenues. You'll see in just about the middle column, the year-to-date actual and net revenues or before capital fees and SPLOST were actually at $943,000 of revenues and over expenditures. When we take the purchase orders into account, we're just about break even if all of those purchase orders were to be liquidated at this time. So pretty much $15,000 is pretty much break even. And then our estimated year end is about $550,000. On the first three lines, the sewer revenues, water revenues, four lines, debt charges and administration fees, we've gone back the last 5 years and gotten monthly averages for each, in this case for January, their percentage collected or billed out for July through January, and use that percentage base and then apply that to the actual billings for this year to come up with the year-end projection.
Okay.
But to summarize, the revenues look like they're going to be right in line with where we expect them to be at the end of the year. Yep. Currently, operating expenses project to be a little under where we were going to be, so we're in good shape there.
Yeah, we're going to wind up net positive.
Yes.
In the John, just a thought here for you as we look at this on a monthly basis. Kind of my focus would be is like January, February is just really very brief on the variances, and then on a quarterly basis we might want to get more involved, deep diving a little bit more on some of the variances. But those interim months, very high level, we're on track. We know where we're going. We can look at the numbers, and that's where I'm going with it. Okay.
On every month, usually the first Tuesday of the month, we run these reports and we sit down individually with all of the division heads and go over all of their line item variances and where they're significantly over or under their expenditure budgets. They have to explain away what's going on.
Yeah, what I would see as part of our financial stewardship and our prowess as business leaders in the utility is that each person, each leader in the organization that has an accountability for a part of the funds would know what his or her glide path is every month, and that they would come to you and say, here's where I am. Not so much there, but here's what I'm doing to get to where I need to be by the end of the quarter or the end of the next quarter. And that's, in my view, that's what we ought to be driving with each of our leaders that have an accountability financially, okay? They ought to be driving that answer with you. You could be the collector of the data, but they ought to be the one to say, hey, I know I'm off here, or I know why I'm showing a surplus because my expenditures haven't come in on an activity, et cetera.
Yes, Yes,
They
sir.
ought to be the ones be driving the results there. So that's where I'd like for us to head, is we can improve that stewardship through each one of our leaders.
And that's actually what we do is, Mr. Burrows, Ms. Roberts and I sit down and we have the numbers in front of us, and then we go down, the division heads explain each of their variances.
Good. Thank you.
So we're pretty much, I think where you're describing that we'll go with that.
John, what's the, if you can, I think you visited this a moment ago, but I missed it. What was the reasoning behind the 15% in cash, in a cash account with BB&T?
January is kind of a transition month for us from moving our investments from BB&T Treasury Management to Synovus Treasury Management under the selections under the RFP that was issued a few months ago now.
So it's just transitional?
Largely, yes.
So the 15% is going to be moving over to Synovus?
It depends on our predicted cash flows as well, because a lot of the money is capital fund money, the R&R reserve and the SIF funds and the capital reserve. So depending on what we anticipate coming in progress payments to contractors, we may actually need to reduce some of those investments to meet our expenditures.
Yeah, I think where we're going with this, John, is where we can earn on cash, we want to earn on it.
Yes.
And have a higher percent earning as opposed to earning less, if you will. So understanding the puts and takes on the cash flows and the project demands and obligations there.
Yes. But
And when will those splost funds?
Actual number of how much would be transferred, that's really dependent on pulling a lot of factors together and then seeing where our cash balances are predicted to be. So I can't say that 15% is going to move over. It may be 7%, it may be 20%.
Right. You're trying to target it right now, so you have a
We're trying to
cushion there.
We're trying to maximize what we have in the higher interest rates.
The 8.9 million that's splost, that's in cash at BB&T, in addition to that 6.2 million that's in cash at BB&T, that's about 18 million. Is that 18? No, 7, 6, 7, 15 million. 15 million over there in cash. What's the payout, when do you expect that 8.9 million to be paid out for the finish of the splost work?
We have,
I'll defer to Mr. Burrows on
we have 3 remaining SPOS projects, well, 2 projects, one of which has 2 phases. The phase 2 of the North Mainland SPOS project has approximately $1.5 million left in it. That should be finished up in the next couple of weeks, and so that outlay of cash will happen very quickly. 4003 is, we're wrapping up the engineering, should be getting that bid very soon, and the phase 3 of the North Mainland project, the bids are actually due mid-March. So that money is going to start being rolling out on the last phases of the North Mainland in 4003. Within the next couple of months, we'll start seeing progress payments come across those. The 4003 project should easily be done prior to the end of the year, and we'll have the vast majority of phase 3 of the North Mainland done prior to the end of the year.
How hard is it for you to do the prediction of expenditures?
The hardest ones are the ones that we're waiting on consulting engineers to provide us drawings on. The actual ones that are under construction, we have a better grasp of when that cash is going to be outlaid.
Can that be part of this report?
Sure.
I think that's where you were kind of going.
Yeah, where I was going was exactly, can we try to identify what that cash flow looks like and try to earn some interest on that money? There's $15 million in cash that's in non-interest bearing account, I'm guessing, at BB&T.
Right, the SPOS funds, we were advised by council not to invest those.
But those are those monies are earning interest, albeit not as much as an investment account.
Oh, they are earning interest?
Yes. And in fact, last month, there's, I think, $20,000 earned on the cash funds.
Yeah, my point is exactly what both Commissioner Elliott and Commissioner Duncan have already said. Where we can earn money, let's try to do that.
Understood.
Anything else, John?
Just going, the next report is the project cost summary report,
Okay.
which lists all of the currently named projects. The top portion of that from 2000, or project number 232 down to 2009 are projects that are either underway or will be starting shortly. Shows the costs incurred to date to the end of the last fiscal year. And then we use the expenditures and balances to complete to determine how much we need to move from our cash accounts into or out of reserves each month as progress payments are made. Sometimes our transfer into the reserve is more than the progress payments. Sometimes progress payments are way more than the scheduled transfer. So that we use this as a tool for moving money around as well. Down at the bottom of that, you'll see there are 5 projects that are complete and ready to be capitalized. So those will be moving to a permanent fixed asset and begin
Let me ask you about-
depreciating those.
What about 807, SSI Phase 2 smoke and dye testing? How can we capitalize that?
Pardon me?
That's no asset, the smoke and dye testing, that was
That's just a study, yes, sir.
services. I don't think we should be capitalizing that.
Okay.
That should just be.
Yeah,
expense out.
we go over this list of completed projects with Mr. Burrows and with Mr. Klein to determine first if they were completed, what date they were completed, or in this case, it's probably not something that should be capitalized.
Yes, sir. But of note, I will say, if you refer to the capital plan we approved earlier, it does, the R&R available balance barely exceeds the amount there, but remember, we're gonna be making monthly transfers into that account to replenish that account.
And then, again, the bottom part of this, this report reconciles to what should be in what the actual cash balances should be. In the case of the repair and replacement reserve, there should be about $15 million in that. And there's about $6.9 million left of the repair and replacement reserve that's available right now for new named projects. And that's the only comments I have on the financials. If anybody has any other questions, be happy to.
I just got one more comment to pick off on what Chairman Turner said. Could you prepare for the next meeting how you intend, what you're going to capitalize that comes out of the R&R and the projects list? And because you got repaving of Yellow Buff Creek, well, that's repair work that we have to pay for. Why would that be capital?
That's-
So kind of go through and
Again,
give us a summary of how we determine whether we're going to capitalize it or treat it as operations and maintenance.
Normally, to be capitalized, our dollar threshold is $5,000, which of course all of these meet, but it needs to be a betterment or improvement of the asset that either improves its function or it increases its life. So it has to meet those 3 criteria to be a capital asset.
Okay, so if I replace a pump and it's over $5,000, you're going to capitalize the new pump. And then you'll start the depreciation of it new.
In some cases, pumps are a little bit, there's a little bit of gray area on pumps because it's a component piece of a much larger asset. So just replacing the pump doesn't really necessarily increase the useful life of
That's
the.
kind of what I'm getting at.
of the
I
lift
wanna
station.
try to understand, you know, when you make a decision to capitalize it, and we increase the value of the asset, and when we're just gonna treat it as, well, that's just a normal operating cost.
In some cases, it may meet those criteria, but in the grander scheme of things, it's not really anything that increases the life or the usefulness of the asset, even though it could be argued either
Do
way.
you understand why I'm
We've had
having-
this argument,
I mean,
we've had this
if my
discussion
generator goes out on
internally.
my car, it's gonna cost me, you know, $400 or $500 to get it replaced.
Yes.
But that doesn't increase the value of the car.
No,
Yeah, I think where we're going with this, John, is we don't need to know the nitty-gritty on components and such, but from a larger scope of governance is, if you can provide to us that, okay, we're on track to capitalize X amount of dollars based on our major projects, activity, and the program of capital work that we've approved. And then the rest would go to O&M, if you will.
yes.
Okay? And I think that would help.
I understood, we
That
kind
would-
of got off on a little tangent here.
Right. And so I didn't want to run down that rabbit hole. I just want to say that we have an interest from a governance standpoint to understand overall where we headed with our major expenditures. We recognize some of these are O&M, but a greater portion is capital, and I think that's where we're headed with what we would like to have, okay?
Thank you.
Commissioner, anything else? You good? Thank you, John. And then at the end of the agenda here, and I think we need to make a minor change to our agenda to add the smoke test presentation. And so,
I mean, you add smoke test generation.
okay, and I'll second that, and all those favor? Okay, it's officially on the agenda.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commission. We have Dr. Blaster here from Public Utility Maintenance and Planning Services. We've got a little bit of nighttime literature for you and some map booklets. Some of this stuff will be on the presentation as well. As of January 24th, the smoke testing project, the legwork of it was completed. The reports were written and drafted. Dr. Blasher's here to give us the presentation that's going to cover everything that they did. If you remember, this project was relegated towards North Mainland and Brunswick. So a very substantial increase over the amount that what we saw what we did in St. Simon's Island, but also an increase in what we actually saw versus St. Simon's Island. So we got a lot of good information out of everything, and you know, from here on, we're going to move and work with System Public and Maintenance and getting everything in line to turn this into more of a project so we have a systematic repair of the actual system that we investigated. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Blaster.
And just one comment before we dive into your presentation. First of all, thank you for coming to present the summary to us. We've reviewed the executive summary, so we look forward to anything you want to enhance that in discussion, but don't want to go down the list.
Yeah, we'll kind of keep it up here, but I'll show you some pictures.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Just so everybody's on the same page, since we have press here. So, you know, we're talking about infiltration and inflow. Every utility out there deals with, you know, the fact it's vital for us to provide utility services. Bad things happen when we don't. And looking at time, this utility, like many utilities, a lot of these assets are older. They're running into life issues, the question of, okay, we're going to rehab them, and does that extend their life? And in this case, some of the things that we do will. And at the same time, my mantra is let's try to keep things cost effective, and it's one of the reasons we did some of the things that we did on this project for you. So age and water will affect the amount of infiltration and inflow you have on the system. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that those are different issues. All right. So if you have a rainstorm and your plant starts to spike, you have inflow. That is stuff off the surface. And so the smoke testing is particularly helpful at finding. It's an older technology, but it's the only way that you find those openings to the surface unless they're just so huge that you can see them. And we do have one of those. All right, so generally what we did is, so when smoking the system, we looked at all of the things that are basically in yellow. We identified those, and as you go through each of the 17 service areas I think that we looked at, we identified about 700 spots where we had smoke coming up that was not what we expected to have. Now, we do expect in houses, we would see it coming out of the stacks of the houses, but we should not see it in where their cleanouts are. We should not see it around manhole covers. We should not see it on eave troughs and things like that, because that means somebody's piped water directly into your system. And that takes up huge amounts of capacity and it increases your risk to sanitary sewer overflow, something we all want to avoid. The reality is it gets worse with time, so this is a system in Southeast Florida that's not dissimilar to what you have. And what you find is that when we look at rainfall on the bottom axis and we look at flows, what happens 2009 in this case was the red line, 2012 was the blue line, and what that's indicating is that less rainfall equals more flow to the plant. And what's happening is there's more openings with time that occur on the system, and as a result we see it as a spike. And the reality is that triangle that you see there that's inflow, that's coming off the surface. Now you do have a little challenge here where you also have tidal water that comes in as infiltration. And in a night investigation that I'll talk about we did in December, we saw that kind of in the downtown area. It was like, hey, that manhole was empty and now it's flowing with a lot of water in it. So that does create some challenges, but that's, like I said, this is a utility that's kind of similar. They have experienced some of the same issues that you do. It's coastal. Okay, so the project you did for us, Public Utility Management and Planning Services, Inc., it's my company. We appreciate the opportunity to do this work for you. We contracted with you to smoke test. We had a whole series of lift station basins, so the report that you have, and I have another copy here, but I may want to hold it up before I give it to you. What we did is in all of the basins that we had, we went ahead and smoke tested that. That was done September, October. There were some little finishing things that were done in November. We met with staff. Ellis was our contact person, and we let them know. We let all the public safety and the city folks know and the county folks know when we were smoke testing so that we did not have people saying, my house is on fire. You know, that does happen. So I know of no incidents. So in getting this done, they're pretty fast to get that done. And so what we did as we went through this, so smoke testing is an easy way to locate the inflow and to verify the system connectivity, i.e. we're looking for storm drains and stuff like that, illicit connections. We found 7 of those as well. And it gives us a pathway to go ahead and make some corrections to the system that will help seal it up, get rid of the peaks. Maybe at the same time, we looked at some opportunities to reduce the infiltration pieces as well. So smoke testing is an easy way to accomplish this. And this is what we're looking for. And like I said, we found about 700 of these. About 2/3 of them were on public property. About 1/3 of these are on private property. So in this report, what we did is there's a listing of all of the private property owners, and we GPSed and photographed each and every one of the openings we saw in the system. So staff was, I appreciate the fact that you allowed us to use Dropbox. It's an online cloud, just like having an extra, C drive in your computer. And so what we did is in there for each one of the lift stations, there's a report. It includes a photograph that has each and every place that we found smoke. It also has a GIS file, so within the report I'll show you in a second, there's a GIS map, and we can feed that to your GIS system. So we've shared this, so staff has access to it. And so that way and if you want to go notify residents, you can say, here's your problem, and here's a picture of it, and here's where it is, and a good portion of those are cleanouts. So what somebody's done is they take the cleanout cap off so it drains their yard. Now, if you put it back on, they're simply going to take it back off, but I'll show you a solution to that problem. I'm here to offer solutions as well. All right. So we found 647 openings, 240 were related to manholes. So the issue there is manholes don't seal, and we showed in Dade County on a test that was done that about 30 gallons a minute of water can go through the manhole lid. This is not the ones with pick holes in the tops. This is just a standard lid like you have. That's how much water will get into it if you start to have a foot of water on top of it. All right, so I'll show you a solution that drops that number by 100 times 100. We found 240 of them were cleanouts. We said 240 were on private property, 8 illegal connections, 7 storm drains, and there's 37 of these that are fairly significant problems. The worst area, or the area that we found the most, was 4002. Surprisingly, not as many in 4001, but that's where the tide sort of came up when we came up here and looked at midnight. So this is a report, it's table 23, that's in the report that you have, that shows for each of the lift station basins what we found, okay? And this is just a summary of what we found in the report and what we have located in the Dropbox. Ultimately, it gives you a map like this, so I'm going to walk over here a second. But what you can see here is each of these red dots has an address. That tells you where we found smoke. All right, so the report then ties to that. And so we did this for each area. And you'll see they're in the report. Each one of the areas is in there. So let's see, where is this? Yeah, that's right where I was at the airport right there. We found a few there as well. So fixing that, well, there are 3 ways to fix it. Manhole dishes will help you with this as well. We can repair the chimneys. We found, and this is fairly typical. So the manhole cover sits on a ring that's made of steel that's supposed to be, connected by grout to the concrete below. And what happens is that when they get hot, they don't expand at the same rate. So that grout gets broken. And so what will happen over time is, as you vibrate it with trucks and vehicles driving over it as well, it starts to be a little loose, and so you'll get water that creeps between the asphalt and the ring, and you'll find little divots that are around the manhole, which means that it's leaking. So the way to fix that is to seal it. We have some apron repairs and some things like that. So we'll see. So this is kind of what you do. If they're lined up, we'll seal it. This is an elastomeric type product. There's several of them that are out there, but you go seal this, and that will fix it. Manhole dishes. I would recommend, and I've given you as, I think, Appendix A, a set of specifications to deal with these issues. So this is a dish for, as an example, it should have a gasket on the bottom side of it. It should have those ribs in it. And it's really important that as they mold it, they don't bend the top. That has to be a molded edge. Otherwise, you will find them in about 5 years in the bottom of the manholes. And I know of nobody that really wants to go try to fish them out. It's almost impossible to do so. And they will ultimately plug the manhole. So you want a dish that's curved. So I gave you some specs for that. So that's the inflow dish. Okay, they're HDPE, so they don't deteriorate. Stainless steel are heavy. And they tend to, there tends to end up being a connection that occurs with corrosion. So they stick to everything, which makes it even worse. So solving the cleanout thing. So this is called an Ldl plug. Now it is a patented product, but it's an example of what to do. There's a couple of variations that are out there. What you do is you put this in you glue it in on a ring, and the plug just drops in there. There's one of them that's just a ball. Okay, and you can put something on it that you can detect it with a wand. All right. And it's black. So underwater, somebody takes their cleanout cap off, they can't see it. And it doesn't allow the water to leak through. And we've done this in 6 or 8 utilities in South Florida under my supervision, and it solves the problem. And the question is, does it work? This is Cooper City. This was before, this was And we asked Cooper City to give us, it was a test project, so I said, you know, he's a friend of mine that runs the system, and I said, give me your 3 worst lift stations. So we did the 3. They were all like this when we got done. So, excuse me?
What do those things cost?
We installed these, they're about $100 to install. The dish is about $20. And we kind of figure the sealing the manhole, I think it's about $200, but typically, including smoke testing and everything, it's about $500 a manhole. Not too costly. We came back up in December because one of the things I like to do is actually look at stuff when people are not flushing toilets and taking showers and doing things. Because generally what you find when you start after midnight, turns out it's about 11:30 in your utility area. So the flows just drop down in many areas to almost nothing. And so what we're going to look for, I look for a 2-inch wide bead of water. And so if I see that flowing, and if you do this for a while, you can tell when it's a toilet flush or whatever it is, you can tell. So what we do is we take a look in the manholes. We opened about 700 of the 1,700 that were there. If upstream we don't see any flow, we don't open. All right. I'm a big believer in if it's not broke, don't break it. So we'll just leave it alone. And so the 2 inches of water running consistently generally is clear. Some of your areas had more than that. There were a lot of them that had about that amount. And so we'll try to identify, going manhole to manhole, which stretch of the line this problem is actually in. And then what we do is we GPS it, we create a GIS diagram. So these maps is the midnight run example, or results rather. And so what we did is if the line is lit up in red, it means that there was leakage that was 2 inches or more flowing at midnight. And so we went through all the basins. We did it over 2 nights. And the good news is people don't get up till 6 o'clock, which helps us as well. And so we had a good 17 hours that we got into it over a 2-night period in December. And so we're looking for that, and we create a spreadsheet. So tables 25 and 26 in the report outline what we found. There were 80-some manholes that had issues, including a few precast ones that have holes in the side, so I recommend you use a calcium aluminate product to fix that. We noted defects that were in the manhole, so those are on there. There were about 20 of them that were surcharged as well. And then I estimate the flow from each of those leaks, and so that you can prioritize what they are. We also looked for things like grease and paper. So the good news is we did not find a lot of paper, okay, in the system. I found systems that are just filled with this as baby wipes and go on from there. So we didn't find a lot of that. We did find a little grease in a couple spots, and that's noted in the report where those are in the spreadsheet. So the results coming out of this basically were that we looked at these calcium aluminate products on the manholes that are messed up. There weren't too many of the brick ones that were a problem. Mm-hmm. We did find, and I started, so there's 2 crews, so I started with the crew in Area 44, which is the mall, which is primarily lined, and that didn't seem to help things because the liners were leaking and there was still water in there. And that's not atypical, because what that tends to tell me is there's a lateral leak problem. And the lateral leak problem kind of was a thing I found. So I probably saw the end of 100 laterals in the system over a 2-night period, and virtually every one of those had some amount of flow that was occurring. I also noted a number of neighborhoods that you guys have replaced laterals across the street, so we noted that. I also noticed there were 6 spots where there were divots in the road and on top of where the sewer line was, which is an indication that the line has a break in it and needs to be repaired. So divots are really important, and it's funny, street crews don't tend to pay attention or tell anybody about them. They just put more asphalt in them, and they really need to know it. So I noted where those were. There were a couple of manholes that had some interesting thing. We had one that was just loaded with chlorine. I have no idea where that came from. It was a force main coming in, but it kind of carried all the way downstream. It was a very clean line. We noticed laterals were the problem, as I said. We found some covers that we could not get off, and so we have a sledgehammer, we have some other things. They were not tied down anyway. We just could not get them off, and so that needs to be fixed. Because that means your crews can't get into them if there's a problem to address. The system was relatively clean. So primarily we were looking at vitrified clay pipe, which looked to be in relatively decent shape. What we could see of it, we did find about 70,000 feet in our area that probably should be TV'd. But I would expect that a significant portion of that is probably going to identify lateral leaks as opposed to the mainline leak problem. In my experience in South Florida and other areas of Florida, because we've been up in the Tallahassee area as well, so not too horribly far from here, is if you have 70,000 feet that you need to TV, you might line less than half of it, and you find that laterals are the other problem. And then the laterals, we need to figure out what's on private property or whether it's there. And we can, if we have cleanouts, we can look and tell that. So we calculated the total flow that looked like it was coming into the system from the areas we had. It was about 500,000 gallons a day was coming in that way. And we did identify the issue, and it was pretty hard to figure out what was creating the tidal influx. But we did notice that was occurring, but if that's on laterals, we can't differentiate it between the laterals and the main line. So down in the southern area there, area 4001, we probably ought to, that may be something to take a look at. And we did try to document if the lines were lined, so at least you knew that. So this is kind of an example, just so you know. So you go through this area here, you see all the red lines. And I think the importance of this, and this is where one of those cost-saving things that's out there, is you probably don't need to TV everything, right? If it's not leaking, why TV it? Just TV the stuff where there's a problem, figure out what the problem is, and go forth. So we've provided all of these maps to you guys, also in GIS, also in the Dropbox. So if anybody needs anything, and we have a couple copies for you. So there's another. This was one of the worst areas, this little community here, and it was just like every street seemed to have some issues.
Where's that?
That appears to be Fairway Oaks.
Yeah. And we had some other areas, and there was virtually nothing. We looked at you have several schools, and a couple of them had some issues, and we identified it. One other one here. So this is more typical, as you find out there's 20% of the lines that have a problem, and that's probably what we've really found. My recommendations to you is you have the bid for the inflow correction, the dishes and things like that. So that's yours. We provide it as part of the project. Don't tell you problems without solutions. And the solutions will run you probably about $400 a manhole area. So what happens is there's different things that happen, but it'll something in that time frame. That would include seal the manhole rings and covers, get the covers off of some of the ones that are there, install the manhole dishes, Defender is one example, install the Ldl plugs as you would need, and you can send that bid out. I will tell you, you will not get very many bidders because there's not really many people that can do all these things and do them the way you need them done. So that's my experience in Florida. I quite often get one bid. And so there's a lot of piggybacking that goes on because you go through all the process and you get one bid. And that bid gets approved by the SRF programs down in South Florida, so everybody kind of realizes it. On the infiltration issues, so there's some manhole fixes. Like I said, we identified where those were. You may have guys that do that or contracts that do that. It's fairly straightforward. The manhole cover problem, we need to figure out. There were some that were displaced, and that typically happens when the paving guys come along and go ahead and demonstrate to you that it's not attached and move it about a foot. Televising, if you want to get into televising and lining program, televise the ones that are lit up first. That would be my priorities. We've given you an idea also on the spreadsheet, which is in Dropbox as well. You can prioritize which ones look the worst or the neighborhoods which look like they're the worst because it's pretty obvious in the diagrams. There are laterals, like I said, is probably a bigger issue, and that's a very difficult issue to address. There's 3 ways to deal with laterals. 2 of them involve lining that compete with each other. One's expensive, one's less expensive, and then you have just replace it, which looks like what you guys have done, which seems like in a lot of cases is less expensive than either of the other 2, and actually may be a better solution. It's a little messier because you have to cut up the roads. But I've started recommending on short laterals that we just replace them and don't try to line them or anything like that. It's just not, the cost is just way less. You can hire a guy to dig it
Yeah, from what we've seen, the lining of lateral is about $8,500 a lateral to get it lined.
Yeah. Yeah, I did see it, and it's gotten worse. So it's an expensive process, and you can dig it out for less than that. And with that, do you all have any questions?
So the manholes, did I hear you right that the manhole repair would be in the neighborhood of $400 to $500 per manhole?
No. The manhole repairs, I didn't price that out. But if you were to go do the ceiling, the dishes, deal with all the little things off-site, typically what we do, we kind of look at an area and say there's, a dozen manholes, and then there's a number. Now, usually that includes smoke testing, which you've already done. It runs about $500 a manhole as an average. So what you do is identify the areas and you do these things. I mean, I can get you exact prices if you want.
We have a manhole rehab contract right now for calcium aluminate. For the full rehab, that's all the way down to the inverts.
Right.
We're paying about $4,500 a manhole.
That's a very good report. Based on the age of our system and what you found, did you find our system in better shape than you thought it would be when you started the job, or in worse shape?
It's, I don't really go in with preconceived notions, but it was in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
But you can, there's a point in time, and we're seeing about 40, 50 years. So most of your manhole covers had 1961, 62, 63 date on it, which gave me a good idea when they were installed. So we're running at about 50 some odd years that you start to see some deterioration at that point. There has clearly been, like I said, there was some lining that's been done previously. So like at the mall, it's clearly there was a problem that you noted. The one big hole we found is at the mall. It's don't drive to the side. It goes about 5 feet down. We did call those in, but they're in there. We did let these guys know when we found something like that. I've seen way worse. It was relatively clean from a paper perspective. So somehow, whatever process that you've worked to educate customers, you're to be commended for that, because I can give you some examples, and it's just bad. And the grease, in the areas that I particularly looked in, so I did better than half of these myself. I didn't see a lot of grease. There were a couple places that we noted it. Typically, that's where restaurants and stuff are, but we didn't really notice a lot of that either. So that's a good thing.
I think we got a pretty good grease guru. Guru, is that what you call her?
Sure.
She's pretty sharp.
That's all good. So, but the laterals look to me like as I go back and look at a lot of these residential neighborhoods. So I'd see we're in a dead end line. Okay, so it should be relatively shallow. And I see 2 inches of flow coming out of there. And I'm sitting there going, how many laterals are there back there? 8? Well, if I add up a bunch of half inches, I'm going to get 2 inches. So, and like I said, I noticed neighborhoods where you guys have all gone back and all the way across the road, we've taken it out.
The area where you saw the tide influence, did you see any fish in the lines?
No, there was no fish. They weren't that deep.
We did find a few at the plant before. They make it all the way down there and get caught on the screens.
Yeah, that's, look at the plant. I had that happen one time. We had turtles in Hollywood. And what it was a broken gravity line coming into the plant, went under a canal. I mean, it was right at the plant. But we fixed it, and the flows dropped 8 million gallons a day on a 45 million gallon a day plant.
Wow.
With our high groundwater system here, I guess it doesn't matter what time of season we do the smoke testing, because it's probably not going to be affected. Generally, you want to do it during dry areas, but I guess it's kind of, with the high groundwater, it doesn't matter.
Well,
it does a little bit.
Interesting question. I would prefer to smoke test when it's relatively dry. Yeah. And so one of the things that we looked at was, well, how much rain were we getting at that point in time? So we don't want that. But I would prefer to look in the manholes in the middle of the night at when the groundwater table's high. What I see is a lot of engineers will go back and do TVing and stuff when it's dry and the water table's low. So there's a disproportionate number of the end of the line, which is the shallow stuff, that I end up going back and identifying as something we need to look at, and that's why the groundwater table has fallen. Yours is fairly high because you're right there, and we didn't see a huge amount of topography anywhere here. So I saw a lot of end-of-line stuff, so it told me the groundwater was in an okay spot.
Other questions? Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll leave you another copy of all this.
Ellis, you got anything for us? Anything else?
No, sir, look forward to getting some of these problems sorted out. It'll be a pretty big undertaking, but we'll have to get, system pumping and maintenance on board, and maybe we can use this to roll out some of our new asset management things we're working on as far as city work is concerned, so.
I will say that the one major problem he was talking about by the mall was a private issue, and that has been referred to the owner of that system.
The mall's been notified and county's been notified about the bigger issues. Luckily, most of them, the larger issues like that weren't actually in our system. They were all private systems leading in our system. So.
Okay, what does our ordinances say about our authority to have an owner, to force an owner to take corrective action?
There are 4 options in the ordinances that allow us to do that. We've sent letters out for when we did the smoke testing on the island for people that had defects, and we've had pretty good success with that. We haven't had to take any drastic measures as far as turning water off or anything in order to do that. They do also allow us in an event, someone doesn't do it, if we don't want to go through the shut-off process, we can add a surcharge to the bill for failure to fix the lateral. We haven't done that yet because we've gotten good response, but notifying the customers.
Good, good. Anything else? Good. All right, our committee is adjourned.